Have you ever had that feeling that something's under the bed? Either as a child or as an adult, it's a feeling that many people can relate to, even if they don't want to admit it. And on today's show, we'll be talking about some terrifying encounters that involve a range of odd creatures, which many people categorize as the Boogeyman. These encounters and more, all coming up on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries. Thank you all for joining me, and welcome. As always, I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope all of you had a great weekend, and before we start, I'd like to say thank you to Ray and Patrice for their support and generosity. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, share, and review the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. These links and others can be found in the show notes. And if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. Remember that all experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. Many believe that the term Boogeyman was first used in the 1500s, when many people began describing the so-called hobgoblins that were allegedly being seen in England. Many believed that these creatures were made to torment humans, and while some only played simple pranks, others were more foul in nature. Descriptions of the Boogeyman range from small creatures to hulking humanoid figures, and everything in between. And the diversity and the strangeness of the descriptions change from person to person and culture to culture. For this reason, it's impossible to know exactly what the Boogeyman is, what it looks like, and what its intentions are. But for the people in today's episode, there's no question that this horrifying entity is real. And we'll begin today's show with a story from the site True Ghost Tales. The witness, who calls herself Charmaine and says that this happened to her when she was just 7 years old, and claims that she began seeing a dwarf-like creature that she says had sharp yellowish teeth, red eyes, and its fingers looked like they were sharpened. This thing would often appear lurking in the shadows just to stare at her, often right in her own room. And as she puts it, sometimes it would smile, the evilest smile I had ever seen. And she says this of her experience with this thing. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. I was so scared to go to bed at night. It would appear each night when the lights were turned off and my parents were sleeping. They never believed me, and I told them about the thing. After a few months, I ignored it, and it didn't like that. He started to scratch the underside of my bed, but I still ignored it. Until one night, when it jumped on my bed and scratched me. I screamed, and my parents came in and told me that I had a bad dream. The next morning, there were scratches on my arm, and this continued for over 6 years. I got fed up with it, and then one night I looked it right in the eyes, and I told it to go away. And it did. I never saw it again, but I felt its presence one more time. I was 16 at the time, and I was visiting my friend, and it was late, so I decided to sleep there. I woke up because her boyfriend was freaking out and said that the Boogeyman was here. I sat up and could feel the thing, but I couldn't see it. I ran to put the lights on, and when we looked at her boyfriend's arms, there were scratches on it. He told me what he saw, and he described exactly the same thing that I saw years ago. I went cold and the fear came back. I told him that I had faced my fears and told it to go away, and it did. This thing lives on fear. In another account, the witness says she was around 7 years old at the time, when she was jolted awake by a piercing pain in her ear. The pain was intense enough that she got out of bed to go tell her mom and stepfather, but something kept her from completing her journey to their room. She says that she crept through the living room and she was suddenly aware of someone or something sitting there in the dark, in one of the chairs. and she describes what happened next. The person looked strange. The face was kind of distorted, but it was dark and I couldn't see very well. "Mom?" I asked. The person just shook their head, and I started getting scared. "Mike?" The person shook their head again, and I decided the best course of action was to just go back to bed so I wouldn't have to walk past this person. I climbed in bed and closed my eyes for a second before opening them and seeing this person standing in my doorway, smiling madly and nodding furiously. I screamed at the top of my lungs and closed my eyes. My stepdad came running out of his room in his underwear with a baseball bat, and that was a scary enough sight in itself. There was nothing there, but the clothes that my mom had folded and put on the chair were now strewn about the living room. For the longest time, I told myself it was my cat, sitting on my clothes. Our next story comes from one Reddit witness that says his 2-year-old child would often wake up screaming uncontrollably, and that when he went to provide comfort, his young son would simply babble, "Bad man, bad man." And one night, things took a turn for the worse, and he would say this: "I heard him whimpering one night and saw a freakishly tall figure in the baby monitor. I nearly shat myself, grabbed my pistol, and ran to his room to find my son locked in the closet and the figure nowhere to be found. The door can only be locked from the outside. There was a gray wool scarf on the floor of his room that I had never seen before. Cops then came and I filed a B&E report, but there were no signs of forced entry or anything. We're planning on moving in a few months." Another encounter comes from a Reddit user who claims that he was around 5 years old at the time, but remembers it like it was last week. According to the witness, he and his family lived in a crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood, and he says that one night he heard strange noises in his room, coming from under the bed, which eventually got so intense that he would run into his parents' room to sleep with them. The parents themselves shrugged it off as a kid's imagination playing tricks on him, and wrote it off. However, on the second night, things would take a turn for the worse, and he says this: "On the second night, I wasn't caught by surprise anymore, and that's when I first said it, and I warned them of what I already knew. There was a monster under my bed, but grown-ups do not believe children, not with anything that matters anyway. We think they have a limited understanding of the world because they're not yet shackled by the chains of logic. Mom and Dad went into the room. Dad checked under the bed and even acted like someone had grabbed his feet, but it was just a joke. They told me there were no monsters in real life, and if there were, they'd be friendly monsters, like the ones I used to watch in Sesame Street. I kept insisting, and they got mad. She was very tired, working long hours while pregnant, and would hear no more of it. Father was a bit more understanding, but only for the first couple of days. After that, he refused to go into my room and rolled his eyes whenever I brought up the monster. I even heard them talking outside our apartment once, saying that they wouldn't respond when I talked about the monster anymore, and that I'll never learn if they do, saying that I'd need to see the doctor if that continued. My memories of the doctor were not fond ones, so that's when I gave up. I didn't call them that night, nor any other night for the next 5 months that we lived there. I knew they wouldn't come, but the noise would. It always did. I was almost asleep very late in the night. It was right under my bed. First a very faint crying noise. If the floor was thicker, maybe I wouldn't have even heard it, and this whole story wouldn't exist. But then I heard the steps, loud but uneven, stumbling, probably right outside the room. Then a terrifying squeak, a door being pushed, a crying voice. A child's voice. From the site True Ghost Tales comes another encounter, which happened in 2007. The witness was living alone in an apartment that she describes as being haunted, with flickering lights and her pet acting up for no discernible reason. This was all very spooky, but things would graduate to her being awoken by a feeling of something sitting on top of her, which left her feeling drained of energy, and with a feeling of dread. Then one night, as she lay awake waiting for something to happen, it finally did. Up from under her bed crept a shadowy entity with apparently malevolent intent, of which she says this. It was about the size of an average person and was all black, and it looked as if it was wearing a cloak and hood, much like the Grim Reaper or the ghost of Christmas yet to come from A Christmas Carol. It was transparent but blacker than black, darker than the darkness of the room. At one point, I thought I could make out glowing orange eyes, but as soon as it saw that I could move my head, a force forced my face into the pillow, and I felt it stick something into my back and the back of my neck. Whatever it was that it stuck in me felt like a jolt of electricity, and I felt my body being pressed into the mattress, and that familiar buzzing sound was louder than ever. At one point, I couldn't even breathe, and I thought I was going to suffocate. Then it spoke in the most evil voice you could ever imagine. I'll never forget what it said, as long as I live. It said,
"I will see to it that you never experience real happiness for the rest of your life. You weren't supposed to live."
I was premature when I was born, and the doctors told my parents that I wouldn't live, but they were obviously wrong. In one account, the witness says that she lived in a 4-bedroom house in the state of Illinois with her parents and grandparents. One night, she claims that she came home from dinner out with her grandparents, and that was when the paranormal would come for her. She says, "My grandparents and I had just got back from the old country buffet, and it was getting pretty late. As soon as I got home, I ran into the bathroom and then decided that I should maybe change my clothes and get ready for bed. I decided, hey, since the whole house is pitch black, I could walk and get my clothes naked. I then took all my clothes off and kicked them behind the bathroom door and proceeded down the hallway in the dark. And just to remind you, it was pitch black, as there were no lights on. I got to my great-grandma's room and reached around for the dresser, trying to remember where everything was, counting the drawer handles to make sure I'm getting the right clothes, but something then caught my eye from underneath my great-grandma's bed. I looked, and the bed sheets that hang off the bed frame were flickering and were curved just a little, as if someone was peeking out. I adjusted my vision, and I saw a glowing white pale face, looking right at me. The bed sheets were moving because its hand was moving the sheets to peek at me. I screamed like no other, and I flew out of my house naked. I had told my mother and my grandparents what I had seen, but they went back into the room and found nothing. There was nothing under the bed at all, and the sheets weren't even messed up. I stood outside naked for at least 1 hour before going back inside. In another creepy account, the witness says that he was living in Wisconsin when he was 12 years old, and that he would begin to experience unexplainable phenomena at night, which seemed to emanate from under his bed. The witness says this: "I remember just getting to rest my head on my pillow when I would feel something like a fist pushing up on the mattress beneath me. I was not sleeping, and I was not just imagining it. I would physically sit up, turn my lamp on, and watch my bed move up and down on that spot. Like I said before, this did not happen to me just once, but several times when I was young. My parents lived on the opposite side of the house, and there was no one that could easily fit under my bed. I was always too scared to try to jump off and run, or even just to look underneath and see what it was, for fear that it would get me. After about 1 minute of it starting, it would stop and not come back for at least a few nights. I never did tell my parents about it, even though it would keep me up late some nights, sleep deprived. I think it's just because it would happen so fast, and when I woke up in the morning, I wouldn't be thinking about it until it was the next night already. In the years following this, I think I still have an irrational fear to sit on my bed with my feet on the ground, and I feel really uncomfortable when I do. I also have still not been able to explain why this happened to me during that age, but I definitely remember every bit of it truly happening." In yet another case, the witness says he was 6 years old at the time, and of course remembers it as clear as day. At the time, he says he lived at a trailer park in Pennsylvania that seemed to have been very haunted. He describes how they would hear footsteps at all hours walking through the trailer, and how he and his older sister had screamed when they saw a shadow figure lurking at the foot of her bed or outside of her window, which would vanish right before their eyes. And then there began the disturbances centered on his own bed. And he would say this: "Every night I would get ready to go to sleep, and my bed would start shaking very slowly, and then after a while it would shake even faster. The first time it ever happened to me, I ran out of my room and told my parents. They said it was just the washer and dryer. But the thing I don't get was even when the washer and dryer were not on, my bed would still shake. Eventually I started sleeping on the couch, but the same thing started to happen, which resulted in me sleeping on the floor beside my bed. I slept on the floor for over 2 years, and I never slept in my bed until we moved out. The house we moved into was a newly built house, and even though we moved, I still did not sleep in my bed until a few months ago. Still today, no one believes me, but I know what happened, and after these experiences is when I started to get really interested in the paranormal." The next report comes from a witness who was also quite young during her encounter, at 12 years old. At the time, her family had a cat who roamed around the premises with a little tinkling bell around its neck, and she claims that she had her frightening encounter with the paranormal as she was lying down to go to sleep one night. She says, "So as I prepared my bed, which was a sofa that converted into a bed, I proceeded to turn off all the lights and the television and lie down. After a long while of trying to sleep, I hear this heavy breathing noise that seemed to originate from under my bed. I thought to myself that it was probably just my imagination, or that I was probably breathing so heavy that I could hear myself. With that thought in mind, I then decided to hold my breath and stop breathing to see if it was me. To my surprise, I still heard the breathing, just as heavy as ever. As the breathing was still going on, I then thought that it could have probably been the cat. Regardless though, I was frozen in fear and did not dare move, and I was thinking of grabbing the television remote control to turn it on, although I don't actually remember if I did or not. So, as I was wondering if it was the cat or not, I then heard the cat's bell jingle 2 rooms down out of my room, and this just freaked me out even more. Since this happened so long ago, I don't actually remember how I spent the rest of the night. I just remember the next morning when I checked under the bed and the couch, and found nothing." Again from the site True Ghost Tales comes a tale from a witness in South Africa, an adult with 2 young sons aged 3 and 4 at the time. She says that strange things started to happen when she was living in a cottage, and one night her children woke her up with panicked, frightened screams, and they would tell her that there was something lurking under their bed. The woman had various pastors come in to bless the place, but nothing seemed to have helped, and the woman says this: "I tried everything. I even got numerous pastors out to bless my cottage and my kids. This didn't help, and eventually I got frustrated as my eldest son kept talking about a person called Hank. Now, we don't know any Hank, and I finally found a group of people who call themselves Spitza. They came to my house and did a paranormal investigation, and the outcome was a picture of a man's face in the window, and a child's voice saying I have made contact. After this, I moved." Things settled down and there was no longer any talk of Hank. However, over the last few months, my 2 sons have become more and more scared to go into their new bedroom, and I now have them both sleeping on a mattress in my bedroom at night. When I ask them what is wrong, they tell me that there is a monster under my youngest son's bed. I have since then removed everything from under the bed so that they can see that there is nothing under there, and when I asked what this monster looks like, they describe a little boy. We have also had our wall unit move on its own, and the toilet seat, if up, is slammed down, or if it is down, it gets put up. I am freaking out, and I cannot keep moving around, and I don't know if this is the same boy from the previous house, or if I just chose another haunted home. When I was a child, I don't recall having specific encounters with anything in particular, as most of my fears came in the form of sleep paralysis or night terrors. And although many of the stories in tonight's episode revolve around children, the phenomena involving what some call the Boogeyman affects many adults as well as children. Perhaps even you. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy beginning to your week, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you so much for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.